Minister for Manpower will be making a related ministerial statement. Members will be able to seek clarifications on both statements during the debate after this statement. Minister for Manpower.
Mr. Speaker, in his statement, Minister Ong has explained why FTAs are critical to Singapore, as well as how they've helped us reap significant benefits for our fellow Singaporeans. The same goes for our openness to foreign workers. We take the same approach when we decide on foreign workers coming to work in Singapore. How does it help Singaporeans? At the start of the 1970s, our GDP was $20 billion. Now, the economy has grown to $454 billion. Foreign workers account for around 1/3 of our workforce. There are more than 2.3 million locals who are employed, and our resident unemployment rate is 4.1%, half of what it was in 1970. We need to understand the real challenges we are facing today in order to have a constructive debate on the way forward. And that is why we're having these two ministerial statements. I will explain with data, with details as to exactly how our foreign workforce policies are implemented in order to benefit our fellow Singaporeans. And I will also give our perspective on the real challenges that we face today and the real solutions that is demanded. Associate Professor James Lim and Mr. Leong asked for the number of intra-corporate transferees, or ICTs for short, professionals and dependents that come in through CECA. Now let me reiterate a point that Minister Ong has made, and that is none of our FTAs, including CECA, gives intra-corporate transferees, or ICTs, unfettered access to our labour market. So please remember that. They all have to meet Ministry of Manpower's prevailing work pass criteria. Under the ICT route, the employer does not have to advertise on mycareersfuture.sg, but the ICTs themselves are subject to additional checks on their seniority, on their employment history, as well as their work and industry experience. They are also subject to more conditions in their eligibility to bring in dependents, whether they want to apply for permanent residency or future employment in Singapore. And if they have brought in dependents, the dependents do not have the automatic right to work here. They can only do so if they qualify for a work pass on their own merits. This is a very fundamental point, and I hope that everyone will remember this. So thus, and as mentioned by Minister Ong, the total number of ICTs has consistently been very small. In 2020, last year, there were only about 4,200 ICTs. Of these, about 500 were from India. That is 500 out of 177,000 EP holders in Singapore. As for the number of professional visas issued, I'm afraid to disappoint Mr. Leong. There is no such category within MOM. As Minister Ong explained, all 127 categories of professionals under CECA currently come in under our regular work pass framework. Now, the PSP has made Indian nationals coming in through CECA a focus of contention, but I'm afraid they have been barking up the wrong tree. The number of ICTs coming in under our FTAs, and in particular CECA, is a very, very small number relative to the total number of EPs. So I suggest we set aside this red herring and move on, more importantly, to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter is this: how do we, as a small country, devoid of any natural resources, remain open to global talent, for us to continue to create opportunities for our fellow country Singaporeans, while at the same time managing the attendant social repercussions? Singaporeans are pragmatic. They understand we need to remain open to global talent. However, they also face real challenges. In particular, they're worried about three things. First, that the growth in EP holders has come at the expense of our local PMEs. Second, that some workplaces have become more concentrated with a single nationality. Third, that there may be discrimination against local job seekers and employees. I've come from the private sector, and I understand and I empathize with these fears, these concerns, and these anxieties. I would like to address each of them in turn, because I want to lay out the facts and also share our approach in dealing with each one of them. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of our approaches are perfect. And obviously, we are always a work in progress. But we will continue to refine them in the light of our experiences, always with a focused view to having a system that will and that can deliver good jobs, good livelihoods, and a thriving economy for Singaporeans, not just for our generation, but for our future generations. And I hope this will enable us to arrive at a better understanding of the choices and the trade-offs that we constantly have to make. First, on the increased competition from foreign PMEs. In Singapore, today, we have one of the best local talent pools in the world. But it is insufficient to meet the breadth, the depth, the needs of the investments that generate the quality and the range of jobs that we have today. So when we bring in new investments, we will sometimes need to attract foreign expertise, foreign talent, while we build up our local capabilities. Ms. Hazel Phua, Associate Professor James Lim, and Mr. Saktiandi Supat asked for the breakdown of local and of foreign workforce numbers by sector. Given the issue at hand, let me focus on EPs. As of 2020, we have around 177,000 EPs, or employment pass holders, in our overall workforce. Manufacturing and construction account for about 1/10. The rest are in the services sector. And if you look at the top three subsectors downwards, Infocom and professional services, collectively, these two sectors account for around 1/5 each, while finance accounts for another 1/7. If you look at the change from 2005, I think that was around the time where CECA was signed, to 2020, the total number of EPs has increased by around 112,000. This was also mentioned in Min Ong's speech earlier on. Over this same period, the number of total PMEs, the number of local PMEs increased significantly by more than 380,000. Now, there have been questions asked, both inside and outside of this House, whether most of the growth in local PME jobs was accounted for by Singapore citizens. If you look at our unemployment statistics, we provide the figure for Singapore citizens. The citizen unemployment rate over the past 10 years has been consistently low at around 3%. Hence, the answer must be a yes. Now, for those of you who have asked how much of this local PME job growth has gone to born and bred Singaporeans, notwithstanding the divisive intent of this kind of questioning, let me state simply that the majority of this growth over the past decade went to Singaporeans born in Singapore. And as we have also shared in response to a written parliamentary question yesterday, 87% of Singapore citizens were born here. So, much attention has been placed on the finance and the Infocom sectors, which alone accounted for 40% of the increase in EP holders. Now, this is significant But what is even more significant is that these two sectors saw even stronger job creation for local PMEs. In Infocom, the number of EPs increased by around 25,000. The number of jobs created in this sector alone for local PMEs was greater at 35,000. In finance, the number of EPs increased by around 20,000, but the number of jobs created for local PMEs was even greater at around 85,000. This is more than 4 times. Now, we focus on these two sectors because they bring good quality jobs. And Singapore, our beloved Singapore, can carve out an advantage and value add significantly in these areas. And as a result, there has been significant job creation. Now, as we attract foreign banks, Infocom companies to create jobs here, they will inevitably need foreign workers to complement the Singaporean workforce. I want to deal with a fundamental misconception, which lies at the heart of some of the things being misconstrued. When a company decides to come into Singapore to invest, and they need about 3,000 people, they may be able to find about 2,500 of these talents in Singapore, but they still need to supplement that 2,500 with the other additional 500 from overseas. Now, if we object and we insisted that the balance of that 500 must all come from Singapore, irrespective, then how do we expect that investment to take off? How do you expect that investment to come in? These 2,500 jobs for the locals would be compromised greatly. So the simple point is that while we have a good Singaporean talent pool, our pool is not large enough to fulfill all of the needs, the breadth and the depth of these enterprises. And very often, foreigners also bring in skills which complement Singaporeans' skill sets as well. So the misconception is that if we said no to the foreigners coming in, and the misconception people think is that these jobs they would have taken would therefore all go to Singaporeans. How can this be possible? I mean, this is a misconception. How do I know that this is a misconception? Because today, even as we speak, we still have 22,000 PME jobs that are not filled. Companies are desperate to fill these jobs. They would love to take in Singaporeans if they could, because Singaporeans are more productive. But these jobs up to now are still not filled. Perhaps Mr. Leong would like to think deeply about that and deliberate and offer us some advice. Now, Mr. Leong also suggests that doing away with foreigners will reduce the displacement of our older PMEs. I wish that was so. But private sector and the real economy do not operate this way. There will always be displacement of PMEs, whether older or younger, in any economy. Why? Because the business world is never static. Industries change, companies downsize, they expand, they relocate, they pivot, they transform. Now, even if, regardless of whether you have foreigners or not, that would not change because this is the function of the business world. What matters most for us is whether we are able to find jobs for these displaced PMEs. And to do this, we need an ecosystem where there is also new companies willing to come and start up in Singapore, new investments, new foreign direct investments coming in, and expanding multinational corporations. So far, I think we have done credibly in this regard. New jobs created have far exceeded the jobs that have been lost, and our employment rate has been kept low. And the re-entry rates for displaced PMEs are high. That said, it is not always easy or possible to find every single displaced PME an equivalent job in the same industry, especially if there's a skills mismatch. An IT sales manager who loses his job may not find a job as a cybersecurity expert, but we do our best to help them find jobs in other growth sectors. If we tell companies which want to invest in Singapore that they can only employ Singaporeans? Or first, employ Singaporeans who have been displaced regardless of skills? I think the answer will be quite stark. They, I think, would opt not to come into Singapore to invest. All companies will want to hire Singaporeans, but companies will also need to have that flexibility to hire the best available talent from around the world to complement our Singaporean workforce. Now, I understand what displaced Singaporeans are going through. Rest assured, we are doing our best to help you and your families. But it is important that we go into the root cause of the problem, we are able to tackle it, and we are able to diagnose the situation accurately and not provide treatment to just treat and relieve the symptoms. Because only when we can identify the right solution, we are able to prescribe, we are able to provide the precise and the appropriate treatment. The fundamental question now is, how do we strike a balance between ensuring that businesses have access to skill sets, to manpower, to grow and succeed, whilst creating opportunities for our local workers to grow and to progress? Our strategy to achieve this has always been two-pronged, ensuring that our workers can compete fairly and can compete strongly. So the first is to ensure that our local workers can compete fairly. We do this through our work pass controls. Our view, our prevalent view, is that foreign manpower should not come to Singapore just because they are cheaper to hire than locals. They should complement but not displace our local workforce. They should bring in extra skills to help the companies and at the same time create more Singaporean jobs. In line with these objectives, at the work permit and the S-Pass level, we have quotas and we have levies in place to regulate foreign worker numbers. We have been progressively tightening quotas. We have been progressively raising levies to reduce manpower reliance, spur job redesign, push for quality growth. Over the past decade, we have consistently and steadfastly held our course in spite of numerous calls from businesses to relax our rules. We commit to productivity-led growth because we believe many of these jobs have the potential to be transformed into good jobs that provide higher real wages and rewarding careers for Singaporeans. For EPs, we do not impose quotas or levies because there is fierce competition for global talent and worldwide shortages in areas such as tech and digital skills. A quota would be a hard cap that would limit our ability to compete at the high end of the global economy, while for a levy to have any impact or any effect at all on EP numbers, it would have to be set very high and would substantially increase business costs. Instead, what we have done is that we have focused on setting and raising the quality bar for EP holders through requirements on salary and qualifications to make sure that the EPs who come in are at the right level and they bring the right skill sets, the necessary expertise and experience to contribute significantly to our economy. Last year, we raised the EP minimum qualifying criteria. Last year we raised the EP minimum qualifying salary in 2 steps, from $3,600 to $3,900, and then we raised it again to $4,500. The salary requirement increases with age. It's also on a graduated scale, which reflects the candidate's experience, his length of time in the workforce, in order to provide sufficient protection for our mature workers. We also introduced a higher bar of $5,000 for applicants in the finance sector to take into account the higher wage norms in that sector. We will continue to review, we will continue to revise these thresholds regularly to ensure that they remain appropriate and they remain in tandem as our economy develops, as our skills, as our income levels go up. Mr. Leong has also previously raised in this House his concern that foreign EPs are cheaper to hire than locals, simply because their employers do not make CPF contributions. I think he fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of our CPF. CPF is set aside for our retirement needs. It can also be used for housing. As foreign PMEs who are not working in Singapore on a permanent basis, I don't think we should be responsible for their retirement adequacy or home ownership needs. Hence, I don't think it makes sense for us to extend our CPF benefits and coverage to them. Fundamentally, our CPF system is designed to benefit our resident workers, not to help attract or deter foreigners. Instead, when reviewing qualifying salary to maintain a level playing field, we take into account CPF contributions as part of the cost to employers. So that is packaging into the cost to employers. Now, Mr. Leong did not suggest that employers should pay foreigners CPF too. I think he realizes this. Instead, he says he wants to impose a $1,200 levy on EP holders. But as I've just explained, a levy is not the most effective or the right way to manage the population of foreign PMEs. I think that it would be better served, better managed by appropriately setting the right salary level for entry into Singapore. Ms. Hazel Phua has also asked for numbers on dependents in Singapore. Now, this is relevant insofar as they are competing with locals for jobs. As shared previously, the vast majority of dependent pass holders do not work during their stay in Singapore. The number of dependent pass holders who have sought employment in Singapore via a letter of consent. So they need, for dependent pass holders, up to May, if they want to work, they need to get a letter of consent, LOC. This number constitutes only about 1% of all work pass holders. In fact, if members would remember, we have already regularized the work arrangements of DP holders in May this year. And in May this year, DP holders who wish to work in Singapore can no longer obtain the letter of consent. Instead, they will have to qualify for a relevant work pass on their own merit. So they go through the normal routes. Now, there will always be calls from workers to tighten our foreign workforce policies further. Just as there will always be calls from businesses to relax them. And I can tell you that in my past life, I was also guilty of that. I've also lobbied to relax, work passes. I mean, that was a function of a listed company. So it is a constant tightrope that the Ministry of Manpower and the Ministry of Trade and Industry have to constantly navigate very delicately amidst highly competitive global markets for both investments and talent. There are limits, ladies and gentlemen, there are limits as to how far we can tighten our controls without eventually hurting Singaporeans. With remote working becoming more prevalent, companies increasingly do not need to site their manpower in Singapore. In fact, we may find more businesses simply choosing to move entire business functions offshore if it becomes too difficult, onerous, or expensive to operate here. Singaporeans will end up with the shorter end of the stick as well by losing some jobs too. And this is precisely why the second prong of our approach, that of ensuring that our Singaporeans can compete strongly, is just as important. In an open and globalized labor market like ours, competition is intense and stiff. There will be some of our fellow Singaporeans who are displaced from their jobs, and we need to help them find replacement jobs. This happens not just because of competition from foreign workers, but because of other factors like technological change and industries phasing out. And this is why the government invests so heavily in retraining, in skills development, so that displaced workers can gain new skills and reinvent themselves, either by doing a different job in the same industry or transiting to another industry altogether. In fact, some industries, as they get sunsetted, we have to help workers to pivot and transform even faster. And really, that is the subject of the 23 industry transformation maps that have been set up over the last couple of years. As Mr. Lim Swee Say used to say, in Singapore, we are unable to guarantee your employment, but rest assured, we will work very, very, very hard to ensure your employability. Upgrading skills and staying relevant is ultimately our workers' best form of protection. We do this through our system of education, through training, and that goes beyond formal schooling. We do this via Skills Future. We also help displaced Singaporeans through job facilitation and support. COVID-19 has been an especially difficult time for many Singaporeans, and therefore we have stepped up support. As announced at budget this year, we have extended the SG United Jobs and Skills Package, the SGUJS. Ministry of Finance has set aside an additional $5.4 billion to support the hiring of 200,000 locals through the Jobs Growth Incentive, JGI, and provided 35,000 traineeships, attachment, and training opportunities just this year alone. These programs are in addition to long-standing programs such as Workforce Singapore's, WSG's career conversion programs. And to make our career matching services even more accessible to locals, WSG has set up in 24 HDB towns this SGU JSCs, that means the SG United Jobs and Skills Centres in all 24 HDB towns. The retrenchment task force, led by WSG and supported by NTUC's E2I, reached out to nearly all retrenched workers in 2020. And of those who took up the task force employment facilitation assistance, you'd be happy to note that more than 2/3 of them have found jobs within 6 months. Ms. Mariam Jaafar asked about the effectiveness of the different capability development schemes in building a local talent pipeline. As of end April 2021, more than 110,000 locals have been placed into jobs and skills opportunities as a result of the SGUJS package. Within the first 3 months of implementation, the Jobs Growth Incentive supported 27,000 employers who hired 130,000 new locals. With the support of employers and the unions, the policies that we have put up have preserved jobs for Singaporeans amidst the crisis of our generation. The numbers speak for themselves. Total employment in 2020, excluding migrant domestic workers, shrank by 166,600. Foreign employment took the most hit, shrinking by 181,500. Resident employment, on the other hand, managed to expand by 14,900 in spite of the downturn. We are not quite out of the woods yet, and there is more work to be done. But, ladies and gentlemen, let us also build on what we have collectively achieved so far. The second part on safeguarding diversity. I want to talk about nationality concentration amongst foreign PMEs. Mr. Leong and Ms. Phua have asked for the nationality profile of our work pass holders and their dependents from China, from India, from the US, and from Australia. Ms. Phua has asked for even more granular data on the sector and jobs commonly held by these same nationalities. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, for foreign policy reasons, we do not publish detailed statistics on our foreign workforce, especially by nationality. And I'm not aware of any country that reports at that level of granularity requested. But nevertheless, we recognize that if misconceptions continue to spread in spite of all of our attempts to address them in many other ways, even more damage will be done. So I will share some numbers to address the misconceptions and allow for meaningful engagement on the issue at hand. The top nationalities that comprise around 2/3 of our EP holders has been consistent since 2005, namely China, India, Japan, Malaysia, Philippines, and the UK. I believe the interest is really in Indian EP holders. The proportion of EP holders from India has increased from about 1/7 in 2005 to about a quarter in 2020. In comparison, the proportion of EP holders from China has remained relatively stable across this same time period. Now, is this the result of more favorable treatment for Indian EP holders due to CECA? The answer is no. As I've shared earlier, all work pass holders in Singapore have to meet the same criteria before they are allowed to enter our labour market. There is no differentiation based on nationality. Rather, these numbers reflect trends in the global demand and supply of tech talent. The larger increase in Indian EP holders compared to other nationalities is driven by a result of rapid growth and choices of growing our digital economy and finance. As every sector seeks to be digitally enabled, their need for tech talent has grown significantly. We don't have enough locals to fill the jobs available. In the Infocom sector alone today, 6,000 jobs currently remain unfilled. Companies can decide which overseas countries they want to bring in their manpower from, based on their needs and the availability of the required talent. China and India, over the last decade or so, are two of the largest suppliers of tech talent. But you would have read, China has sprouted so many unicorns. And they have, the PRC companies themselves have a huge demand of their own. So many Chinese talent decide to stay in China to work. And I can tell you that this is the numbers that we're seeing across the construction industry amongst the migrant workers as well. I think prior to my coming on board as Manpower Minister, I think many members here would know that I deal with the DOMs most of the time. So I can share with you the same statistics. Now, India's talent, on the other hand, they've continued to look outwards. They have also the advantage of being English speaking. Now, this phenomenon is not unique to Singapore. It is global. India is the largest country of origin for international migrants. This is in the 2021 January UN DESA report. In 2020 alone, it accounted for 18 million international migrants, up by 10 million from 2000. India has grown to become the second largest source of immigrants in the US, the third largest in the UK, and these two countries are also heavily invested in developing the technological capabilities. Now, our companies, our industries, our enterprises, they are both creators, as well as they are creators of technology, but they are also adopters of the talent that is needed to create these technologies. Given our relative shortage of manpower, even if the workers don't come from India, they will come from somewhere else. Now, I hope that Mr. Leong is not objecting to Indians per se. The point I think we should ask ourselves is this: are they helping our companies? Are they helping our enterprises? Are they helping us to grow our economy and create better Singaporean jobs? The answer is yes. It is not surprising, however, that this increasing concentration has caused some social frictions and anxiety to Singaporeans. In some ways, this is understandable. And to some, we may even say that it's expected because these EP holders are transient. They work in Singapore for a number of years, and they contribute to our economic growth. Apart from some EP holders who settle down and become PRs or Singapore citizens, most of them, most EP holders work here for a few years, and they either return home or they move on elsewhere. So it is to be expected that they are different, and we do feel that they are different. And this is the challenge of living in our multicultural society and a globalized world, as Minister Lawrence Wong spoke about recently. This is something that we will have to proactively, and we have been constantly monitoring and managing. Indeed, when a single nationality becomes too prominent, and that can have a disproportionate impact on our existing culture, our beliefs, it can cause our fellow Singaporeans, ourselves included, to feel less at home in our workplaces and in our neighborhoods. In the early 2000s, we experienced a similar situation when the share of PRCs in our foreign workforce increased significantly before tapering as China's growth took off. Both then and now, the larger numbers did not go unnoticed, and they created frictions within our communities. We understand these concerns, which is why we review and we update our work pass policies regularly. We always seek to balance the needs of our economy with the needs of our society. We have to bring in the talent and the skills to keep our economy growing, while tracking that the number of foreigners in our midst stays at a level that we are able to cope with and manage the social frictions that will arise from time to time. Now, this is a series of trade-offs. It is not going to be a once-off adjustments. It will be a constant balance that we have to continuously monitor and get right. Today, the government does monitor the concentration of nationalities at the firm level. Mr. Leong asked whether the threshold percentage of a company's workforce from a single nationality is a criterion for the Fair Consideration Framework, or FCF, watch list. The answer is yes. In shortlisting firms, Manpower Ministry looks at whether they have a high concentration of foreigners from a single nationality source, in addition to a high source of foreign PMETs relative to their industry peers. However, being flagged in the FCF watch list is not evidence that the firm has committed any wrongdoing. Potentially, it could be a sign that some unfair hiring may be occurring. The purpose of this watch list is to have the Tripartite Alliance for Fair and Progressive Employment Practices, or TAFEP, actively engage these companies to review and improve, where needed, their hiring practices and their human resource capabilities. The majority of the firms are cooperative. They respond positively and they exit the watch list. Now, for the small minority that are unresponsive, they can have their work pass privileges curtailed, or they can be suspended for a specific time period. And this is not a small penalty. Today, this is an effective process, albeit intense, resource intensive. We currently have about 400 firms placed on the FCF watch list. Now, there are limitations in terms of the reach and the number of firms that we can put through this process. We will be looking to complement, to strengthen the FCF watch list with a more scalable approach. As mentioned in MUM's Committee of Supply speech this year, we are also exploring further refinements to our EP framework. Today, we rely primarily on salary as a gatekeeper to select complementary talent, because this is easy to understand and administer. But we are also exploring further refinements, further additional refinements to achieve our objectives of a strong Singaporean core, complemented by a diverse foreign workforce. I hope to share more details in due course. Last but not least, I want to deal with discrimination. We know not all employers play by the rules. We have zero tolerance towards discriminatory hiring practices. all employers are expected to comply with the requirements of the FCF and not discriminate on characteristics that are not related to the job. When it comes to hiring foreign PMEs, employers must first advertise on mycareersfuture.sg and consider all candidates in the local workplace fairly before submitting a work pass application. TAFEP investigates potential cases of pre-selection based on proactive surveillance. We use data analytics and AI as well to find out. So we actually sort of study the data quite aggressively. So we also receive complaints from the public and we act on them as well. Since its introduction in 2014, the Ministry of Manpower has been progressively enhancing this framework. In January 2020, we stiffened penalties further for discrimination cases so that errant employers can have their work pass privileges suspended for at least 12 months and sometimes up to 24 months. Last year, we extended the FCF job advertisement requirements to cover S-passes as well as EPs. And we doubled the minimum advertisement period from 14 days to 28 days to give local job seekers more time to respond to job openings. Mr. Liang Yinghua has asked about the results of our efforts. Over the past 3 years, TAFEP has handled an average of 170 nationality discrimination cases arising from complaints annually. The top 3 sectors making up about half of the complaints are the wholesale and retail trade, administrative and support services, and other service activities. These cases are investigated by TAFEP and where warranted, they are referred to MOM for enforcement. Going forward, we will do more to clamp down on egregious employers with discriminatory employment practices. Several MPs like Mr. Louis Ng, Mr. Patrick Tay, and Mr. Vikram Nair had earlier suggested strengthening our levers to give more bite to our tripartite guidelines on fair employment practices. We take these suggestions seriously and we have been studying various options. Ladies and gentlemen, on a fundamental level, the government's goal has always been to create a better life and a future for Singaporeans. We do that through growing the economy, through enlarging the pie so that more locals can enjoy better jobs and a higher standard of living. We do that by tirelessly building up the Singaporean core through a world-class education system, through continuous upskilling and reskilling. And we do that through working closely with all stakeholders involved to stamp out discriminatory employment practices and ensure a fair playing field to protect our Singaporean workers. There are careful balances and trade-offs to be made all the time. The government is intent on keeping this balance right to achieve the goal of creating win-win outcomes for all. MUM will always be both pro-worker and pro-business, and this is necessarily a joint effort. The power and the responsibility to make this happen does not lie with the government alone. Businesses must be fair and progressive employers. They must win the confidence and the trust of their employees and the wider public by investing in a strong Singaporean core, even as they complement it with a diverse foreign workforce. Workers, too, must adopt a growth mindset and continuously develop their skills. This is the spirit of our pioneers, who are resilient in the face of challenges and daring in new opportunities. Unions and trade associations and chambers, or TACs, must continue to serve as multipliers of these positive changes. They help to build the bridge between government and businesses and workers, and they have spearheaded important initiatives to help our businesses and workers transform and upskill. And I hope members of all parties take their responsibility. They must take their responsibility as representatives of the people seriously and work towards constructive solutions and avoid exploiting divisive fault lines. The tripartite partnership between unions, employers, and the government is the real reason why we have managed to succeed over the years. We are at a critical inflection point in our economic development. The pandemic has caused significant economic damage the world over. We face many challenges in the post-pandemic era, but there are also abundant opportunities if we play our cards right. We've distinguished ourselves internationally with how we manage COVID, and we have enhanced our trust premium. Many businesses are now looking seriously at investing more in Singapore, which will create good jobs, but only if they can get enough workers, foreign workers as well, to supplement our local workforce. If we can bring them in, we can continue to grow our economy for another 5 to 10 years. But if we lose this opportunity, we will not only take longer to recover, the impact will be borne by our older workers and also by our youths who will graduate into the workforce over the next few years. This is a golden opportunity for Singapore to pull ahead. But if we turn protectionist and we make it difficult for companies to hire talent from around the world, then we will lose this opportunity. A business hub means being cosmopolitan, having people from around the world doing business with the whole world and creating more opportunities for Singaporeans. It will bring in competition, but if the competition is not here, it will be outside. The competition will be in helping other companies in other countries to beat ours here and displace our workers. Let us work together to continue improving Singaporeans' lives and building a better future for all. Mr. Speaker, sir, can I just take a couple more minutes in Mandarin, please? 建国以来，新加坡经济政策的基石一直以国人作为中心。我们致力为国人创造良好的就业机会，从而提升大家的生活。新加坡开放的经济体促进了几十年来的蓬勃发展。我们不仅吸引了不少跨国大型企业来到本地投资，在我国设立区域总公司，我们也更帮助了许多的本地企业把握发展契机，开拓海外市场。外国企业，特别是专项或新兴领域的公司，难免需要引进当地的专才来补充新加坡员工可能还没发展或暂时缺乏的技能。但这些外界专业人士所带来的专项技能，在公司起步和发展的过程中，都可以转移给新加坡员工。假以时日，新加坡员工就能够掌握新的技能，提高他们的竞争力，步步高升。这些外界专业人士给我们国人在求职就业上造成了一定的压力，这是我能够理解的。一些国人或许在应征工作的时候，感到竞争比过去更加激烈，又或者是认为自己受到不平等的待遇。也有一些国人可能担心，我们新加坡的社会结构会不会出现了变化。我很明白国人的担忧，就此，政府在推动经济持续发展的时候，我们一定会继续保障我们国人的生计，这是我们铁定的承诺。对此，我们推行的政策从两大方面会着手。首先，我们会确保国人继续掌握好的工作机会。在过去几年，我们逐步收紧了外界员工的配额，特别是在 S 准证方面。去年，我们还2度调高了就业准证的薪金门槛，以确保企业引进的是外界专才。与此同时，我们也大力投资于国人，确保他们在国际市场上保持竞争的优势， 能够闯出一片天。其次，保障新加坡人在职场上受到公平对待，我们更新了公平考量框架，加重对违劣雇主的惩罚。人力部也正在探讨如何进一步的改善我们就业准证的框架。所谓人生可比是海上的波浪，有时起，有时落。好运、坏运，总是要照着功来行。Somehow it sounds different when I speak in Mandarin. You know, you're supposed to sing it in Hokkien. You know, 多年来 I think even Mr. Pritam Singh knows that it's a Hokkien song. 多年来，新加坡人经历了不少风风雨雨，遇到任何挑战都从不低头。毕竟 ，I cannot resist it。毕竟爱拼才会赢。面临这场疫情的危机，国人秉持先辈无私奉献、能屈能伸的新加坡精神，这表明了新加坡人是能够刻苦耐劳。但是我们在乎的是要得到公平的待遇的对待，这得要靠多方面的努力和配合。公司企业要继续创新，要继续转型，打造能够吸引更加多新加坡人的工作。国人应不断地提升他们自己的技能，对工作机遇保持开放的心态。政府会给予各方面的援助，帮助国人渡过难关，维持一个公平和公正的社会。我们这一年来都在努力面对抗疫情所带来的种种挑战。这时候，我希望大家我们更加要团结一致，发扬我们新加坡精神。政府会与国人同甘共苦，同舟共济，愈强走出困境，创造一个美好的未来。谢谢大家。